The cold steel of Dexter Holloway's wedding ring felt like a shackle on Delilah Montgomery's finger as she stared out the window of her father's grand house in Santa Fe, watching her freedom disappear with the setting sun of April 1875. Tomorrow, she would move into her new husband's home, a man 30 years her senior who had purchased her future with nothing more than a business proposition to her debt-ridden father. "You'll learn to be content, Delilah," her father had told her, not meeting her eyes as he signed away her life. "Dexter Holloway is the wealthiest cattle baron in the territory. You'll want for nothing." Nothing except love, she thought bitterly as she twisted the gaudy ring. Nothing except choice. The wedding had been a hollow affair earlier that day. While the townspeople celebrated with Dexter's expensive whiskey and congratulated the happy couple, Delilah had stood frozen beside her new husband, forcing smiles that never reached her eyes. She had just turned 18, and already her life was over. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching riders pass on the dusty main street below. One man caught her attention, tall and lean in the saddle, with a distinctive black hat pulled low. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. When he glanced up toward her window, Delilah instinctively stepped back into the shadows of her bedroom. "Mrs. Holloway," her maid called softly, entering the room. "Your father wishes to speak with you downstairs." Delilah nodded, smoothing her wedding dress, a garment she now despised. Downstairs, her father waited in his study, a glass of whiskey in his trembling hand. "You've made me proud today, daughter," Richard Montgomery said, but his eyes held shame. "The arrangement with Dexter will save our family name." "But at what cost, father?" Delilah asked quietly. "Don't be dramatic," he snapped, then softened. "Dexter is a powerful man. He'll provide for you better than I ever could." "He's cruel," she whispered. "Everyone in town whispers about what happened to his first wife." Her father drained his glass. "Rumors, nothing more. Now prepare yourself. You'll move to the Holloway Ranch tomorrow morning." As Delilah climbed the stairs back to her room, she heard the front door open and her father greeting someone. Curious, she paused on the landing and peered down to see the black-hatted stranger from the street standing in their foyer. "Mr. Montgomery," the man said, his voice carrying a slight drawl. "I'm Yates Blackwood. I've come about the horses you advertised." "Ah, yes, the Morgans. Fine timing, Mr. Blackwood. I was about to withdraw them from sale. My new son-in-law suggests I keep them." Delilah continued watching as the stranger Yates removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by outdoor life. "He couldn't be more than 25. "That would be a shame," Yates replied. "I've ridden 2 days to see them." "Perhaps I could at least have a look before you decide." Something in his voice made Delilah linger. Unlike the polished businessman who frequented her father's home, this man had an authentic presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "Very well," her father conceded. "We can ride out to the corral now." As they moved toward the door, Yates glanced up and caught Delilah watching. For a brief moment, their eyes met his, a startling blue against his tanned skin. He offered a small, respectful nod before following her father outside. Delilah returned to her room, strangely unsettled by the encounter. She began packing her belongings for tomorrow's departure, each item a reminder of a life that was ending. Outside her window, she could hear her father showing Yates the horses in the distant corral. When darkness fell, Delilah changed into her nightgown and sat at her vanity, removing the pins from her elaborate wedding hairstyle. The house had grown quiet, her father likely asleep after the day's celebration. As she brushed her long chestnut hair, a soft knock came at her balcony door. Startled, she grabbed her robe and cinched it tightly. The knocking came again. Heart racing, she approached the French doors that led to the small balcony overlooking the garden. Through the glass, she could make out a masculine silhouette. "Who's there?" She called softly, clutching her robe tighter. "Yates Blackwood, madam. I apologize for the intrusion, but I need to speak with you." Against her better judgment, Delilah unlocked the door and opened it slightly. Mr. Blackwood, this is highly inappropriate. In the moonlight, his features were more defined, strong jaw, straight nose, and those penetrating blue eyes regarding her with unexpected gentleness. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important, he said, keeping his voice low. May I come in, just for a moment? Absolutely not, she replied, though without much conviction. Then I'll speak plainly here. I know who you married today, Mrs. Holloway, and I know what kind of man Dexter Holloway truly is. Delilah's breath caught. What do you mean? His first wife didn't die of fever like he claims. She took her own life after years of his abuse. Yates's jaw tightened. My sister was their housekeeper. She saw the bruises, heard the screams. Cold dread washed over Delilah. The rumors she'd heard suddenly felt much more substantial. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because I saw your face today, watching from that window. Yates gestured upward. You looked like a prisoner awaiting execution. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I'm leaving for Colorado at first light. There's work at a ranch near Denver. Good work. His eyes met hers directly. Run with me. Delilah almost laughed at the absurdity. Run with you? I don't even know you, Mr. Blackwood. You don't know Holloway either, not really. But I can promise you one thing: I won't hurt you. I'm offering you a chance, nothing more. You're asking me to abandon my family, my name, everything I know. I'm asking you to save yourself, he countered. I've seen what happens to women in Holloway's care. You deserve better. Delilah's mind raced. Everything inside her screamed that this was madness, yet a small voice whispered that Yates Blackwood might be offering her only escape. I'll be at the crossroads north of town at dawn, he said, stepping back. If you come, we'll ride for Colorado. If not, he shrugged. I wish you well, Mrs. Holloway. Before she could respond, he disappeared over the balcony rail, descending with the agility of someone accustomed to such escapes. Delilah closed the door with trembling hands. Run away with a stranger or face a lifetime with Dexter Holloway. The choice seemed impossible. She crossed to her bed and sat heavily, eyes falling on the small portrait of her mother on the nightstand. What would you do, Mother? She whispered to the painting. Her mother had died when Delilah was just 12, but she remembered her as a woman of quiet courage. Sleep evaded Delilah that night. When the first hint of dawn lightened her window, she was already dressed in her plainest traveling gown, a small bag packed with essentials. The wedding ring sat abandoned on her vanity. She penned a brief note to her father, explaining nothing yet somehow everything. Then, with the household still sleeping, Delilah Montgomery, not Holloway, never truly Holloway, slipped out the back door and into the uncertain promise of morning. The path to the northern crossroads was deserted, the town still shrouded in pre-dawn stillness. Each step felt both terrifying and liberating. As the crossroads came into view, Delilah saw a solitary figure on horseback, waiting beside a second, saddled mount. Yates straightened when he spotted her, relief evident in his posture. He dismounted as she approached. You came, he said simply. I may be making the worst mistake of my life, Delilah responded, clutching her bag tighter, or preventing it. He took her bag and secured it to the second horse's saddle. Can you ride astride? We need to cover ground quickly. Delilah nodded. Her father had taught her to ride properly before society deemed it inappropriate for a young lady. This is Penny, Yates said, helping her mount the chestnut mare. She's steady and sure-footed. As the sun crested the distant mountains, illuminating the desert landscape in gold, Delilah and Yates rode north, away from Santa Fe, away from Dexter Holloway, and into an uncertain future that somehow felt more promising than the certain misery she'd left behind. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only briefly to rest the horses at a small stream. Delilah's muscles ached from the unaccustomed exertion, but she welcomed the pain. It was pain of her choosing, not inflicted by another. We need to keep moving, Yates said, checking the horizon behind them. Your husband will have men searching by now. The word husband made Delilah flinch. How far to Colorado? At this pace, about 5 days. We'll avoid main roads and towns." He handed her a strip of dried beef from his saddlebag. "It won't be comfortable." "Comfort isn't my concern," she replied, accepting the food. "Freedom is." Yates studied her with new appreciation. "You're stronger than you look, Mrs." He stopped himself. "What should I call you?" "Delilah." Just Delilah. She never wanted to hear Mrs. Holloway again. "Delilah," he repeated, the name sounding different in his low voice. "We should go." By nightfall, they had reached a small box canyon where Yates said they could safely make camp. As he tended the horses, Delilah gathered wood for a small fire. The domestic task felt strangely satisfying after a day of flight. "We can't risk a large fire," Yates said, returning to her side, "but it should be enough to keep the chill away." In the growing darkness, Delilah studied her unlikely rescuer as he efficiently prepared their camp. His movements were economical, practiced. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the men she'd known in Santa Fe society, but there was something compelling about his weathered features and direct gaze. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked as they sat beside the small fire. "You could have simply warned me and continued on your way." Yates poked at the embers with a stick. "I told you about my sister working for Holloway. What I didn't say was that after his wife died, he turned his attention to her." His jaw clenched. "By the time I found out and went to get her, she was broken inside and out. She died 3 months later." "I'm so sorry," Delilah whispered. "I couldn't save her," he said, his voice rough with old grief. "But when I saw you yesterday, looking so trapped, I thought maybe I could prevent history from repeating itself." The simple honesty of his words touched Delilah deeply. "Thank you," she said, the inadequate phrase all she could offer. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Then Yates insisted Delilah take the only bedroll while he kept watch. "What about you?" she asked. "I've slept on harder ground with less reason," he replied with a faint smile. "Rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Exhaustion quickly pulled Delilah towards sleep, but not before she had time to marvel at how completely her life had changed in 24 hours. Yesterday, a reluctant bride. Today, a fugitive riding with a stranger across the New Mexico territory. And somehow, despite the danger and uncertainty, she felt more alive than she had in years. Dawn arrived with the distant sound of hoofbeats that jolted both Delilah and Yates awake. He was on his feet instantly, dousing what remained of their fire. "Riders coming from the south," he said tersely. "Could be anyone, but we can't take chances." They packed quickly, erasing all signs of their camp. As Yates helped Delilah mount, his hands lingered briefly on her waist. "If they're Holloway's men and they catch up to us," he said quietly, "ride hard for that ridge and don't look back. There's an old mining settlement beyond it where you can find help." Fear clutched at Delilah's throat. "And you? I'll delay them." His expression was grimly determined. "I won't leave you behind," she insisted, surprising herself with the vehemence of her declaration. A complex emotion flickered across Yates's face. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." They rode northwest, keeping to rocky terrain where their tracks would be difficult to follow. By midday, they had seen no further signs of pursuit, but Yates remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail. The landscape changed as they rode, the desert giving way to pine-covered foothills. When they stopped to water the horses at a small creek, Delilah splashed her face with the cold water, washing away the dust of their journey. "We're making good time," Yates said, crouching beside her. "Another hour and we'll reach Apache territory." Delilah looked up sharply. "Is that safe?" "Safer than Holloway's men," he replied. "I've traded with the local band before. Their chief, Nayland, respects those who respect his boundaries." He hesitated. "But we should be prepared. You'll need to follow my lead exactly." "I trust you," Delilah said, the words emerging before she could consider them. Strangely, she realized they were true. They continued their journey through increasingly forested terrain. Late afternoon brought them to a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. "We'll camp here tonight," Yates decided. good visibility in all directions. As they set up camp, a more comfortable rhythm developed between them. Delilah gathered firewood while Yates prepared a small rabbit he had shot earlier. The domesticity of the scene struck her as oddly natural, despite their circumstances. "Tell me about Colorado," she asked as they ate. "What awaits us there?" Yates smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Mountains higher than you can imagine, forests so thick you can get lost just walking 100 yards. The ranch where I've worked before sits in a valley with grass tall enough to tickle a horse's belly." "It sounds beautiful," Delilah said wistfully. "It is." He studied her across the fire. "What about you? What were your dreams before Holloway?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in years. "I wanted to teach," she admitted. "I've always loved books, learning. My mother taught me French and literature before she died. I thought perhaps I could do the same for others." "You still can," Yates said. "Denver has schools. Growing cities need educated women." The simple way he acknowledged her ambition, treated it as valid rather than dismissing it, warmed Delilah more than the fire before them. "What about your family?" she asked. "Besides your sister, I mean." A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents to cholera when I was 16. It was just me and Hannah after that." He poked at the fire. "She was all the family I had." Delilah's heart ached for him. "And now I'm a man who knows what matters," he said simply. "Truth, freedom, standing by your word." He looked up at her. "What Holloway did to Hannah, what he would have done to you, that's not something a man with honor allows." They sat in companionable silence as night deepened around them. Delilah watched Yates across the flickering firelight, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought this honorable stranger into her life at precisely the moment she needed him most. That night, she insisted on taking a watch shift, allowing Yates a few hours of rest. Sitting wrapped in his coat, rifle across her lap as he had shown her, Delilah felt a curious sense of competence she had never experienced in her sheltered life. Perhaps there was more to her than the ornamental daughter her father had raised her to be. When Yates awoke for his watch, he found Delilah still alert, scanning the darkness. "You're a natural," he said softly, settling beside her. "Hardly," she smiled. "But I'm learning." His hand briefly covered hers. "That's all any of us can do." Morning brought heavy clouds and the promise of rain. They ate quickly and packed their meager camp, eager to make distance before the weather turned. As Yates had predicted, they encountered an Apache hunting party before midday. 3 warriors on horseback appeared suddenly on the trail ahead, weapons ready but not threatening. Yates raised his hand in greeting and spoke several words in what Delilah assumed was the Apache language. The lead warrior responded, his gaze moving assessingly between Yates and Delilah. "He wants to know if you're my wife," Yates translated quietly. Delilah's cheeks warmed. "What should I say?" "For simplicity's sake, yes, it's safer." She nodded, and Yates spoke again to the warriors. After a brief exchange, the Apache leader nodded and gestured for them to follow. "They're taking us to meet Nayland," Yates explained as they rode. "It's a good sign. If they meant us harm, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The Apache camp was nestled in a protected valley, a collection of hide structures and more permanent wooden dwellings. Women paused in their work to watch the strangers pass, while children peeked curiously from behind their mothers. They were brought before a dignified older man sitting outside the largest structure. Nayland, the chief, listened impassively as Yates explained their situation in a mixture of English and Apache words. "He understands more English than he lets on," Yates murmured to Delilah. "Show respect, but don't be afraid." When Yates finished speaking, Nayland studied Delilah for a long moment before addressing her directly. "You run from white man's law?" he asked in accented English. "I run from a man who would harm me," Delilah answered honestly. "Not from justice." Nayland nodded slowly. "Many kinds of law. Man's law, nature's law, heart's law." His dark eyes held wisdom accumulated through decades of leadership. "You follow heart's law. This is good." He spoke rapidly to one of the younger men who departed immediately. You stay one night, Nayland told them. Rain comes, not good for traveling. Tomorrow you go. He gestured to a woman who had approached. My daughters show you where to rest. As they followed the woman to a small dwelling at the edge of the camp, Yates touched Delilah's arm lightly. That went better than I hoped, he said quietly. Nayland is giving us shelter and his implicit protection, no small thing. Will Holloway's men follow us here? Delilah asked. They'd be fools to enter Apache land uninvited, Yates replied. Even Holloway wouldn't risk that kind of conflict. We're safe for tonight. The dwelling they were given was simple but comfortable, with woven mats covering the earthen floor and furs piled in one corner for sleeping. The chief's daughter, who introduced herself as Casa, brought them food, a rich stew and flatbread that tasted better than anything Delilah had eaten in days. Outside, the promised rain began to fall, a steady patter against the hide roof. The sound created a cocoon of intimacy around them as they ate in the small space. How did you learn to speak their language? Delilah asked. Spent a winter trapped in these mountains after a hunting trip went bad, Yates explained. A band similar to this one found me half frozen. They could have left me, but they didn't. I stayed with them until spring, learned what I could. You've had quite a life, Delilah observed. So different from mine. Different, not better, Yates said. Just different choices, different paths. Not always choices, she reminded him. Until 2 days ago, I had very few of those. Yates's expression softened. And now? Now I'm beginning to understand what freedom feels like, Delilah admitted. It's terrifying and wonderful at once. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the drumming rain. Delilah was acutely aware of Yates's presence in the small space, his scent of leather and pine, the way his shoulders filled the width of the dwelling, the gentle care with which he had treated her since their flight began. I should check on the horses, he said abruptly, rising to his feet. Rest. You're safe here. After he left, Delilah arranged the furs into 2 separate sleeping areas, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the thought of spending the night in such close proximity to Yates. Despite the impropriety of their situation, she felt no fear of him, only a growing warmth she wasn't ready to examine too closely. The rain continued through the afternoon. Delilah ventured out briefly, fascinated by the Apache camp. Casa found her watching women working at a tanning rack and invited her to join them. Though they shared few words in common, Delilah found herself welcomed into their activity, learning through demonstration how to scrape and treat a deer hide. By the time she returned to their dwelling, her hands were raw, but her spirit was lighter. Yates was already there, talking with a young Apache man. They looked up as she entered. This is Tarak, Yates introduced. He brought news. Riders were seen at the southern edge of Apache territory, white men asking questions about a man and woman traveling together. Delilah's momentary sense of security evaporated. Holloway's men? Likely, Yates confirmed, but they turned back when warned off by Apache scouts. They won't enter the territory, but they'll be watching the boundaries. So we're trapped. Not trapped, Yates corrected. We just need a different route. He spread a rough map on the ground between them. Tarak says we can follow this northern pass. It's longer, but it keeps us in Apache territory for another day's ride before crossing into Colorado here. He pointed to a narrow gap in the mountains. We leave at first light, he concluded. Try to get some rest. Sleep came fitfully to Delilah that night. Each time she drifted off, she dreamed of Dexter Holloway's cold eyes and possessive hands reaching for her. She woke repeatedly, gasping, only to find Yates instantly alert, his quiet reassurance calming her racing heart. During one such awakening, when the rain had finally stopped and moonlight filtered through the smoke hole in the roof, Yates moved to sit beside her. Same dream? He asked softly. Delilah nodded, drawing her knees to her chest. I can still feel his hand on mine when he put that ring on my finger, like ice. Hesitantly, Yates reached out and took her hand in his warm one. "You're not his, Delilah. You never were." The simple touch and the conviction in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Not just of Holloway, but of everything ahead. I've never been so untethered." "Being untethered isn't the same as being lost," Yates said. "It means you're free to find your own way." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, "And you're not alone." The tenderness in his gesture undid something tight in Delilah's chest. Without thinking, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder. After a moment's hesitation, his arm came around her, holding her with a gentleness that made her previous tears flow freely. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you." They stayed that way until Delilah's tears subsided. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by her display of emotion, Yates simply handed her his handkerchief. "Try to sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch a while longer." Morning came with clearing skies and renewed purpose. The Apache provided them with additional supplies: dried meat, corn cakes, and fresh water skins. Nayland himself came to see them off, speaking briefly with Yates before turning to Delilah. "You have good spirit," he told her. "Strong heart." "This man," he nodded toward Yates, "he has honor. Listen to each other, you will find your way." Delilah thanked him with genuine gratitude, touched by the wisdom and kindness they had received from people who owed them nothing. As they rode away from the camp, following Tarak, who would guide them to the northern pass, Delilah felt a curious mixture of apprehension and hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, it was hers to choose. They rode through terrain more rugged than anything Delilah had experienced: steep switchbacks, narrow paths along sheer drops, dense forest where branches snagged at their clothing. Tarak led them confidently, occasionally pointing out landmarks or signs of wildlife. By midday, they had reached a high ridge overlooking a spectacular valley. Tarak indicated they should stop to rest the horses. "He says we're making good time," Yates translated. "Another few hours to the pass, then we'll camp for the night at a place he knows." As they shared a simple meal of dried meat and corn cakes, Delilah studied the vast landscape spread before them. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I never knew our territory held such wonders." "Most people don't," Yates replied. "They stick to towns and established trails, never seeing what lies just beyond." "Like me," Delilah acknowledged. "Until now," Yates smiled. "You're seeing it now, that's what matters." Their journey continued through the afternoon, the terrain gradually changing as they descended from the high ridge. Tarak led them to a sheltered glen beside a small waterfall, indicating this would be their campsite for the night. "He'll leave us here," Yates explained as they dismounted. "Says the path ahead is clear, just follow the stream north until it joins the larger river. That will lead us to the pass." Delilah thanked Tarak in his own language, using phrases Casa had taught her. The young warrior seemed pleased by her effort, offering a rare smile before departing with a final word to Yates. "What did he say?" Delilah asked as they watched him ride away. Yates seemed oddly hesitant. "He said I found a woman worth crossing mountains for." Color rose in Delilah's cheeks, but she didn't look away from Yates's steady gaze. "Is that what you're doing? Crossing mountains for me?" "I'm helping someone escape a fate they don't deserve," he said carefully. "Is that all?" The boldness of her question surprised even Delilah herself. Yates stepped closer, close enough that she could see the varying shades of blue in his eyes. "No," he admitted quietly. "That's not all." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Yates cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should set up camp while there's still light," he said, his voice rougher than usual. They worked together efficiently, gathering wood, preparing a small fire pit, and unsaddling the horses. The domestic routine had become familiar over their days of travel. Yet something had shifted between them, a new awareness that made even simple tasks feel intimate. After a dinner of rabbit that Yates had snared, they sat beside the fire as darkness settled over the glen. The waterfall provided a soothing background music to their conversation, which flowed more easily than it had before. Yates told stories of his travels across the Western Territory's cattle drives in Texas, mining in Nevada, logging in the Northwest forests. Delilah shared memories of her mother, the books they had read together, the dreams she had nurtured in private. "What will you do once we reach Colorado?" she asked as the fire burned low. "Find work at the ranch like I planned," Yates replied. "It's good land, good people." He poked at the embers. "And you?" "I don't know," Delilah admitted. "Find somewhere to stay in Denver, perhaps. Look for teaching work, as you suggested." Yates nodded slowly. "The ranch is about 2 days' ride from Denver, close enough to visit." He left the thought unfinished. "Is that what you'd want?" Delilah asked softly. To visit, in the firelight, his expression was difficult to read. "What I want," he said carefully, "is for you to have the freedom to choose your own path, without pressure, without obligation, even from you, especially from me." He met her gaze directly. "I didn't help you escape one man's control to place you under another's." The integrity of his answer touched Delilah deeply. In a world where men had always decided her fate, here was one who insisted on her right to determine it herself. "Thank you," she said simply, reaching across to touch his hand. They slept on opposite sides of the fire that night, but Delilah felt closer to Yates than she had to anyone in years. Dawn brought a chill mist rising from the waterfall. They broke camp quickly, eager to make distance while daylight lasted. As Tarak had instructed, they followed the stream northward, the terrain becoming increasingly gentle as they descended into broader valleys. By midday, they reached the larger river he had mentioned, a substantial waterway that carved a path through the mountains ahead. "The pass should be about half a day's ride upstream," Yates said, consulting the rough map Tarak had drawn for them. "Once we cross it, we'll be in Colorado territory." "And safer?" Delilah asked. "Holloway has influence, but less across territorial lines," Yates confirmed. "And he'll expect us to head straight north from Santa Fe, not this roundabout eastern route." They rode steadily through the afternoon, the river their constant companion. The landscape grew more dramatic as they approached the pass, sheer cliffs rising on either side of the river valley, the water rushing white and loud beside them. When they stopped to rest the horses, Delilah wandered to the river's edge, trailing her fingers in the cold mountain water. The journey had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her skin was sun-kissed now, her hands toughened from days of riding and camp work. Even her posture had changed, the rigid propriety of Santa Fe society replaced by a more natural confidence. "You look different," Yates observed, coming to stand beside her. "Do I?" she asked, curious about his perception. "You hold yourself differently, less like someone expecting disapproval," he smiled. "It suits you." Before she could respond, the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon. Yates reacted instantly, pushing Delilah down behind a boulder as a second shot kicked up dirt near their feet. "Riders?" he hissed, drawing his own rifle. 3 of them coming fast from downstream. Delilah's heart hammered in her chest. "Holloway's men? Has to be." "They must have guessed our route." Yates peered carefully around the boulder. "They've got us pinned. The only way out is up through the pass, but they'll have a clear shot at us on that trail." "What do we do?" Delilah asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Yates's face was grim with determination. "I'll draw their fire. When I do, you take both horses and ride hard for the pass." "No," Delilah grabbed his arm. "I told you before I won't leave you behind." "This isn't a discussion, Delilah," he said sharply. "I promised to get you to safety, and I mean to keep that promise." "And I won't have your death on my conscience," she countered. "There must be another way." Another shot ricocheted off the rocks above them, showering them with stone fragments. The riders were closing in. Yates's expression softened momentarily. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he muttered, but there was admiration in his tone. He surveyed their surroundings with quick calculation. "The river," he said suddenly. "It's our only chance." If we can get across, we can reach those cliffs on the far side. They'd have to ride a mile downstream to find a crossing, which gives us time to reach the pass. But the current is strong but not impossible, he finished. Can you swim? Delilah nodded. My father insisted. Said a proper lady should be accomplished in all things. A faint smile touched Yates's lips. For once, I'm grateful for his propriety. He glanced at the horses. We'll have to leave them. Take only what you can carry. Quickly, they gathered essential supplies, food, Yates's rifle and ammunition, a knife for Delilah, the map. Stuffing everything into a waterproof pouch Yates had among his gear, they prepared to make their desperate crossing. Wait for my signal, Yates instructed. I'll fire twice to draw their attention, then we run for the river. Don't hesitate when you hit the water, swim hard for the far bank. Delilah nodded, heart racing but resolve firm. I'm ready. Yates met her eyes for a long moment. Whatever happens, Delilah, I don't regret a single moment of the past days. Before she could respond, he raised his rifle and fired 2 quick shots in the direction of their pursuers. Then he grabbed her hand, and together they ran for the river. The shock of the cold water stole Delilah's breath as they plunged in. The current immediately grabbed them, stronger than she had anticipated. She fought to keep her head above water, kicking desperately against the pull of the river. Beside her, Yates was a powerful swimmer, one arm stroking while the other held their supplies high. Shots rang out from the bank they had left, but the attackers' aim was compromised by the moving targets. The river seemed impossibly wide, the far shore receding rather than approaching as the current swept them downstream. Delilah's limbs grew heavy, her soaked clothing dragging at her like weights. Just as her strength began to fail, Yates's arm encircled her waist. Together, he gasped. Kick with me. Their synchronized efforts slowly gained ground against the current. After what felt like an eternity, Delilah's feet brushed the rocky riverbed. With a final surge of energy, they staggered onto the far shore, collapsing onto the stony bank. Are you all right? Yates asked between heaving breaths. Delilah nodded, unable to speak yet. They lay side by side, recovering, until shouts from across the river spurred them to movement. Looking back, they could see Holloway's men racing downstream, clearly searching for a crossing. We need to move, Yates said, struggling to his feet and offering Delilah his hand. The pass isn't far now. Soaked and shivering, they began the climb toward the distant notch in the mountains that marked the territorial boundary. The terrain was rough, all broken rock and sparse vegetation, offering little cover but many obstacles. They had ascended perhaps halfway to the pass when gunfire erupted again. Holloway's men had found a crossing and were now on their trail. A bullet splintered rock just above Delilah's head, sending sharp fragments flying. Run, Yates urged, pulling her behind a large boulder. I'll hold them off. We go together or not at all, Delilah insisted, her voice steady despite her fear. Frustration and admiration warred in Yates's expression. Stubborn woman, he muttered again, but he nodded. Stay low, move fast. They scrambled upward, using the scattered boulders for cover whenever possible. The gunfire became more sporadic as their pursuers were forced to dismount and follow on foot. As they neared the pass, Delilah's foot slipped on loose shale. She cried out as she fell, pain shooting through her ankle. Yates was at her side instantly. I can't put weight on it, she gasped as he helped her up. Without hesitation, Yates scooped her into his arms. Then I'll carry you. You can't, it's too far, watch me, he replied grimly, and began to climb. Delilah had never witnessed such determination. Despite the steep terrain, despite his own exhaustion and the weight of her body, Yates moved steadily upward. His breathing became labored, his muscles trembling with effort, but he never paused. The shots from below grew more distant. Their pursuers, burdened by their own exhaustion and the difficult climb, were falling behind. Finally, they crested the rise and passed between the towering rocks that marked the pass. Yates staggered a few more yards before gently lowering Delilah to a sheltered spot behind a large boulder. "We made it," he said, collapsing beside her. "Welcome to Colorado territory." Delilah laughed despite their situation, a wild, relieved sound. "We're alive. For now." Yates peered back the way they had come. "They'll still follow, but we have some breathing room. Let me see that ankle." Gently, he examined her injury, his fingers careful on her swollen skin. "Not broken, I think. Just a bad sprain." As he bound her ankle with strips torn from his own shirt, Delilah watched his face, the intense concentration, the care he took not to cause her additional pain. In that moment, something shifted irreversibly within her heart. "Yates," she said softly. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers. Whatever he saw in her expression made him go very still. "Thank you," she continued. "Not just for this, for everything. For offering me a choice when no one else would." "You don't owe me gratitude," he said roughly. "It's not about owing." Delilah reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "It's about seeing, truly seeing, the kind of man you are." Yates caught her hand in his, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. For a long moment, they remained frozen in that tableau, something powerful and unspoken flowing between them. Then a distant shout broke the spell. Yates released her hand and moved to check their back trail. "They're still coming, but slowly," he reported. "We need to find better shelter before dark. Can you walk if I support you?" Delilah nodded, allowing him to help her to her feet. With his arm around her waist and hers across his shoulders, they continued into Colorado territory, leaving New Mexico and its dangers behind. The terrain beyond the pass descended more gently into a forested valley. As the sun began to set, Yates found a small cave formed by fallen boulders, enough shelter to protect them from the night air and conceal a tiny fire. Their supplies were limited to what they had carried across the river, but Yates managed to start a small fire using dry moss and his tinderbox, which had somehow survived the soaking. Their clothes dried slowly as they huddled near the flames. "How far to the ranch you mentioned?" Delilah asked, trying to ignore the pain in her ankle. 2 days under normal circumstances," Yates replied, arranging branches to feed the fire. "With your injury and on foot, perhaps 4. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm slowing us down. Don't apologize." Yates's voice was firm. "We're alive and across the territorial line. That's what matters." They ate sparingly from their meager supplies, aware that conservation was necessary. As night deepened around them, the temperature dropped significantly. "We should share body heat," Yates said practically. "It's too cold to maintain propriety." Delilah smiled at his matter-of-fact approach. "I think propriety abandoned us somewhere back in Santa Fe," he chuckled, the sound warming her as much as the fire. "Fair point." They arranged themselves with Delilah's back against Yates's chest, his arms encircling her. The position was intimate but necessary, and somehow it felt right, as though the barriers between them had been gradually dissolving over their days together. "Sleep," Yates murmured against her hair. "I'll keep watch." But despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Delilah. She was acutely aware of Yates's solid presence behind her, his steady breathing, the strength in the arms that held her. After days of danger and flight, there was something profoundly comforting about his nearness. "Yates," she said softly, uncertain if he was still awake. His voice rumbled against her back. "When you said you didn't regret a moment of the past days, did you mean it?" His arms tightened slightly around her. "Every word." Delilah shifted, turning in his embrace until they were face to face in the dim firelight. "Even though we've been shot at, nearly drowned, and are now hiding in a cave with barely any supplies," a small smile touched his lips. "Even then." "Why?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Yates studied her face for a long moment, his eyes tracing her features as though committing them to memory. "Because in all my years of wandering, I've never met anyone like you, Delilah. Your courage, your determination." He paused. The way you looked at me that first night when I said run with me like I was offering you the world instead of just a dangerous escape. You were offering me the world, she whispered. Freedom is the whole world to someone who's never had it. His hand came up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. I promised myself I wouldn't do this, he said roughly. That I wouldn't take advantage. It's not taking advantage when it's wanted, Delilah interrupted, her heart pounding. When it's reciprocated. In the flickering firelight, she watched his expression change, uncertainty giving way to hope, and then to something warmer, deeper. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Yates leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, but it ignited something within Delilah that she had never experienced. She responded with an eagerness that surprised them both, her hand coming up to curl around the nape of his neck. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Yates rested his forehead against hers. We should stop, he said reluctantly. You deserve better than a cave floor and a man with nothing to offer but himself. What if that's exactly what I want? Delilah asked. Just you, just this. Yates pulled back slightly to search her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, for he smiled a full, unguarded smile that transformed his features. Then who am I to argue? He murmured, and kissed her again. They spent the night in each other's arms, sharing warmth and gentle discoveries. Despite their circumstances, despite the danger still lurking behind them, Delilah felt a peace she had never known. Here, with Yates, she had found something authentic, a connection based not on social expectations or financial arrangements, but on mutual respect and growing affection. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering into their shelter. Delilah awoke to find Yates already up, checking her ankle with gentle hands. The swelling's down, he reported. How does it feel? She flexed her foot carefully. Better, still sore, but I can walk. Good. He helped her to her feet. We should get moving. I want to put more distance between us and those men. They ate a meager breakfast and packed their few possessions. Before leaving their shelter, Yates pulled Delilah into his arms for a brief, fierce embrace. No matter what happens, he said against her hair, know that these days with you have been worth everything. The journey through the Colorado wilderness was challenging but beautiful. Forests of pine and aspen surrounded them, mountains rose majestically in the distance, and wildflowers carpeted meadows in brilliant bursts of color. Despite her injured ankle, Delilah found herself enjoying the trek, especially with Yates's steady support beside her. They traveled cautiously, avoiding open areas where they might be spotted. Though they saw no further signs of pursuit, both knew they couldn't afford complacency. By the second day, they reached a small settlement, just a few rough cabins clustered near a creek. Yates approached carefully, leaving Delilah hidden among the trees until he could assess the situation. He returned with welcome news. The settlers were a small group of families homesteading together, with no connections to Dexter Holloway. Better yet, one family was willing to sell them a horse, not a fine animal like those they had left behind, but sturdy enough to carry them both. I traded my pocket watch and most of our remaining ammunition, Yates explained as he led the rangy brown gelding back to Delilah. But it's worth it. We'll make much better time now. The settlers had also provided them with supplies: flour, salt pork, coffee, and even a small pot for cooking. Their generosity touched Delilah deeply. People can be kind, she observed as they rode away, she seated before Yates on their new mount. Even to strangers. Frontier folk understand hardship, Yates replied, his arms around her as he held the reins. Most have faced their own struggles. They made good progress that day, the horse allowing them to cover ground that would have taken twice as long on foot. By nightfall, Yates estimated they were less than 2 days' ride from the ranch. Their camp that night was more comfortable than previous ones. With proper supplies, Yates prepared a real meal: biscuits cooked in a pan over the fire, salt pork fried crisp, and strong coffee that warmed them from within. As they sat beside their small fire, bellies full for the first time in days, Delilah found herself contemplating the future more concretely than before. "What's it like?" she asked. "The ranch, I mean." Yates smiled, the firelight catching the lines around his eyes. "Beautiful country." The main house sits on a rise overlooking the valley. There are bunkhouses for the hands, barns, corrals. The Harrimans, the owners, are good people, fair employers. And they'll have work for you. Last time I passed through, Frank Harriman said there'd always be a place for me. Yates poked at the fire. He was expanding his operation, looking for experienced men. Delilah nodded slowly. "And would there be a place for me there too?" Yates looked up sharply. "You still plan to go to Denver, don't you? Find teaching work?" "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. Denver is a growing city, but it's still rough. A woman alone with no references, no connections, it won't be easy. "You'd stay at the ranch instead?" Yates asked carefully, his expression guarded. "If there was work for me," Delilah clarified. "I'm not asking for charity." "I can cook, so keep accounts. Surely a large ranch needs such skills." Yates was silent for a long moment, studying the fire. When he finally looked up, his blue eyes were serious. "Delilah, if you stay at the ranch, people will assume things about us, about our relationship." "Let them assume," she replied steadily. Unless you'd rather I didn't stay." "God knows I want you to stay," Yates said roughly, "but I need to be sure it's what you truly want, not just what seems safest." Delilah moved around the fire to kneel beside him. "Yates Blackwood, I've had enough of safe choices made for the wrong reasons. This isn't about safety or convenience." She took his hand in hers. "This is about choosing my own path with clear eyes and an open heart, and that path leads to wherever you are." The naked emotion in Yates's face humbled her. "Delilah," he said hoarsely, "I have nothing to offer you but myself. No property, no fine home, just the work of my hands and the word of my mouth. Those are worth more than all of Dexter Holloway's cattle and land," she replied firmly. "I've seen your honor, your courage. I've felt your gentleness. What more could any woman ask?" Yates pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying what words could not. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "When we reach the ranch," he said softly, "and we're properly settled, would you consider becoming my wife? Not because society expects it or for protection, but because I love you, Delilah. I think I have since you appeared at that crossroads at dawn." Joy bubbled up within her, unexpected and overwhelming. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Blackwood, because I love you too." They reached the Harriman Ranch on a clear afternoon 2 days later. The valley spread before them, just as Yates had described lush grass stretching to distant mountains. Cattle grazing in contentment, the ranch buildings clustered on a gentle rise. Frank Harriman greeted Yates like a long-lost son, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile at the sight of the rider approaching his gate. His welcome extended immediately to Delilah once Yates explained their situation, though with significant editing of certain details. "Any friend of Yates is welcome here," the rancher declared, ushering them toward the main house. "Martha will see you settled, miss. We've got a small cabin just beyond the orchard, been empty since our last foreman moved on. It needs some work, but it's solid." Delilah caught Yates's questioning glance and nodded slightly. They had discussed waiting to announce their intention to marry, at least until they were established at the ranch. Martha Harriman proved to be as welcoming as her husband, a tall, capable woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She took one look at Delilah's travel-worn appearance and immediately ordered hot baths prepared and fresh clothing found. "You're about the size of my youngest," she declared, assessing Delilah with a practiced eye. "She's married and gone to Pueblo now, but her things are still in her old room. Help yourself until we can get into town for proper supplies." That evening, cleaned and rested, wearing a borrowed dress that fit surprisingly well, Delilah joined the Harrimans and their ranch hands for dinner in the large kitchen. Yates sat beside her, freshly shaven and in clean clothes himself, looking more relaxed than she had yet seen him. Frank Harriman raised his glass in a toast. "To new friends and old," he said warmly. "Welcome home, Yates, and welcome to you, Miss Montgomery." The name, her maiden name, which Yates had suggested using for simplicity, struck Delilah with unexpected force. She was no longer Mrs. Holloway. That brief, terrible chapter of her life was closed. Later, as they walked together toward the small cabin that would be Yates's home, with Delilah temporarily housed in the main house until their marriage, Delilah expressed this thought. "It feels like being reborn," she admitted. As though Delilah Holloway was just a bad dream. Yates took her hand as they strolled through the orchard, apple blossoms scenting the evening air. "You were never truly his," he reminded her. "A name on paper doesn't change who you are inside. And who am I inside?" She asked, half teasing, half serious. Yates stopped, turning to face her in the dappled moonlight filtering through the trees. "You're Delilah," he said simply. "Brave, stubborn, compassionate Delilah, the woman who chose freedom over security, the woman I love." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, her heart full of gratitude for this man who had offered her an escape and found his own heart in the process. "Soon," she whispered against his lips. "Soon I'll be Delilah Blackwood. Has a nice ring to it," he agreed, smiling down at her. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Delilah quickly made herself useful at the ranch, taking over account-keeping for Martha Harriman, who confessed she had never enjoyed the task. Yates resumed his role as one of Frank's most trusted hands, riding out daily to check cattle and mend fences. In the evenings, they worked together on the small cabin, repairing its roof, replacing broken window glass, and adding small touches that would make it a home. The Harrimans, understanding their situation better than they had revealed, tactfully looked the other way when Yates and Delilah spent time alone together. A month after their arrival, with the cabin transformed and their positions at the ranch secure, Yates and Delilah rode into the nearest town to be married by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. The ceremony was simple, but meaningful. Martha Harriman had insisted on lending Delilah a proper dress, not a wedding gown, but a lovely blue silk that complemented her eyes. Yates wore his best shirt, and a new vest Martha had helped Delilah sew as a surprise. "Do you, Yates Blackwood, take Delilah Montgomery to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher asked, his voice carrying through the small church. "I do," Yates replied, his eyes never leaving Delilah's face. "And do you, Delilah Montgomery, take Yates Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Delilah answered, the words feeling like a sacred vow after all they had endured together. The simple gold band Yates placed on her finger felt nothing like the cold, ornate ring Dexter Holloway had forced upon her. This ring was warm from Yates's pocket, a perfect circle symbolizing the completion they had found in each other. That night, in their cabin with its new curtains fluttering in the spring breeze, they truly began their life together. As husband and wife, they shared not just their bodies but their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future they would build. "I never thought I'd find this," Yates confessed as they lay together in the darkness. "After Hannah died, I just wandered, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." "And now," Delilah asked, her head resting on his chest, "now I've found my place," he said simply, "with you." Summer flowed into autumn, and the Blackwoods became an integral part of the Harriman Ranch. Delilah expanded her duties beyond bookkeeping, establishing a small school for the children of the other ranch hands. Yates was promoted to foreman when the Harriman son decided to pursue medical studies in Denver instead of ranching. They received word, through cautious inquiries made by Frank Harriman during a cattle sale in Santa Fe, that Dexter Holloway had eventually abandoned his search for his runaway bride. The humiliation had apparently driven him to sell his New Mexico holdings and relocate to California far enough away that Delilah could finally release the last of her fear. On a crisp October morning, as golden aspen leaves drifted past their cabin window, Delilah shared news that brought tears of joy to Yates's eyes. "A baby," he repeated, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Due in spring," Delilah confirmed, smiling at his wonder. "Our own little Blackwood." Yates gathered her in his arms, his kiss tender with promise. "You've given me everything," he whispered. "A home, a purpose, and now a family." "You gave me something far greater," Delilah replied, touching his beloved face. "You gave me choice, and I chose you." Outside their window, Colorado stretched vast and beautiful mountains touching sky, forests changing with the seasons, the land itself a promise of possibility. Like the territory around them, their future lay open before them, full of challenge and wonder and hope. And it had all begun with 5 simple words spoken on a desperate night. "Run with me." Years passed, seasons flowing one into another like the river that ran through their valley. The Blackwood family grew first with the birth of Hannah, named for Yates's sister, and 2 years later with the arrival of Richard, carrying his grandfather's name if not his flaws. When Frank Harriman decided to retire in 1882, he offered Yates and Delilah the opportunity to buy into the ranch as partners. With savings carefully accumulated and a small loan from the Denver bank, where Delilah had established a solid reputation through her meticulous bookkeeping, they accepted. Blackwood Harriman Ranch became known throughout Colorado Territory for its quality stock and fair business practices. The small school Delilah had started grew into a proper schoolhouse, serving not just the ranch, but neighboring homesteads as well. On warm summer evenings, Yates and Delilah would often sit on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. In those quiet moments, they sometimes spoke of the desperate flight that had brought them together, the river crossing, the harrowing climb to the pass, the days of uncertainty and fear. "Would you do it again?" Delilah asked once, as they celebrated 10 years of marriage. "Knowing everything that would come after, would you still have said run with me to a stranger at her window?" Yates took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band that had never left her finger. "1,000 times," he answered without hesitation. 1,000 times and more. In 1890, when Colorado had been a state for 14 years, and their children were nearly grown, a letter arrived that shook their peaceful existence. Richard Montgomery, Delilah's father, was dying and wished to see his daughter one last time. "You don't have to go," Yates told her as they discussed the matter in the privacy of their bedroom. "After what he did, he's still my father," Delilah said softly. "And he's the only grandfather our children have ever known, even if only through stories." In the end, they traveled together to Santa Fe Yates, Delilah and their teenage children. The city had changed in the 15 years since their flight, growing more prosperous and refined. Yet as they rode down streets once forbidden to them by fear, Delilah felt only a distant melancholy rather than the terror she had once expected. Richard Montgomery had aged poorly, his once commanding presence diminished by illness and regret. When Delilah entered his sick room, his eyes filled with tears. "Daughter," he whispered, reaching a trembling hand toward her. "You came." "I came," she confirmed, taking his frail hand in hers. "Can you ever forgive an old man's terrible mistake?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I sold your happiness for financial security. There has not been a day I haven't regretted it." Delilah glanced back at Yates, who stood supportively in the doorway with their children. "There's nothing to forgive, Father," she said gently. "Your mistake led me to the greatest joy of my life." She introduced him to his grandchildren, Hannah with her father's blue eyes and quiet confidence, Richard with his mother's thoughtful nature and love of books. Though weak, Richard Montgomery rallied enough to spend several precious days getting to know the family he had never expected to meet. On their final evening in Santa Fe, as her father rested, Delilah and Yates walked the quiet streets together, arm in arm. Strange to be back. Yates observed, looking around at the plaza where they had once been hunted fugitives. It doesn't feel like home anymore, Delilah replied. Just a place from our past. They paused outside what had once been the Montgomery family home, now owned by a wealthy merchant from the east. Delilah studied the window of her former bedroom, the window where she had first seen Yates, where he had later appeared with his desperate proposal. "We've come full circle," she said softly. Yates pulled her closer against the evening chill. "Not a circle," he corrected. "A journey, one that's still unfolding." Richard Montgomery passed peacefully 2 days later, having made his peace with his daughter and met the grandchildren he had never expected to know. In his will, he left Delilah a substantial inheritance, the proceeds from his business investments over the years. "What will you do with it?" Yates asked as they traveled back to Colorado. Delilah had already decided. "We'll establish a proper school, not just for the ranch children, but for any who wish to learn, with dormitories for those who live too far to travel daily." Her dream became reality within a year. Blackwood Academy opened its doors in the autumn of 1892, with Delilah as its headmistress and a staff of qualified teachers recruited from Denver and beyond. The school quickly gained a reputation for excellence, particularly in its opportunities for young women seeking education beyond the basics. As their own children grew and established their lives, Hannah taking an increasing role in ranch management alongside her father, Richard pursuing medical studies in Denver, Yates, and Delilah found new purpose in their educational endeavor. On the 20th anniversary of their flight from Santa Fe, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set behind familiar mountains. Delilah's head rested comfortably on Yates's shoulder, his arm around her as naturally as breathing. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, gesturing toward the prosperous ranch, the school buildings visible on the neighboring rise, the peaceful security they had built together. "That night when you climbed to my balcony," Yates chuckled, the sound as warm and beloved as ever. "I was hoping we'd survive the week," he admitted. "Anything beyond that seemed like tempting fate. And yet here we are," Delilah marveled. 20 years later. "Here we are," Yates agreed, turning to kiss her temple. "And do you know something, Delilah Blackwood? I'd still run with you. Today, tomorrow, always." "Always," she echoed, the word both a promise and a confirmation of all they had already shared. As twilight deepened into night, they remained together on the porch, two people who had once been desperate strangers and were now the closest of companions. Their story, begun in fear and flight, had transformed into one of enduring love, proving that sometimes the bravest choice is simply to run toward possibility, hand in hand with someone who sees your true worth. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference.